So welcome back to our YouTube channel where we're going to be sharing a lot more of the teachings that happen within the host platform. Welcome into 2025. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I hope you had a wonderful new year, and really looking to kind of grow and expand our presence on YouTube. And today I really want to talk about some real fundamental teachings and understandings on not only shadow work, but really laying some foundations of what really healing looks like, understanding the process that we have to move through. And as I touched upon in my last video, when we start to do shadow work or come into a space of healing, we come into a space of grieving. So it's about processing all of the emotions, all of the stuff we've pushed away and abandoned. And today I'm just going to go a little bit more deeper and expand on that a little bit more, and to understand how a process of fragmentation happens, and what it actually does to the psyche, and how we end up suppressing so much, and how what we suppress begins to formulate the shadow that we carry. But also, more importantly, the understanding of why shadow work is so life-changing, and exploring a little bit more in regards to shadow work gold, understanding what shadow work gold is, and understanding how to shift the emotional vibration or the emotional frequency of the body. Because I think the most important thing to understand is that you truly want to shift your life. You have to shift how you feel. I think so many people kind of get it back to front, where they think, if I go get X, Y, and Z, if I create this, if I can go get that out in the world, then that's going to make me happy. And then so what we do is we externalize the internalized conditions. We then say, when I have this, when I achieve that, and then we project this onto the world. But more often than not, we're actually projecting from a place of lack. We're actually projecting from a place of discomfort. We're actually projecting from a place of not feeling enough. And so if we continue to project from that place, and we never actually turn inwardly and understand, where am I coming from? Why am I trying to create? Why am I trying to escape? Why do I need this? Then it actually doesn't give us a great opportunity to build the foundations. Now, the foundations of a good feeling life, have to be built on feeling good first. It's to be able to feel first of all, in harmony within yourself, to feel at ease within yourself, before you can even start to create harmony in your life. And this is really what is understanding about mirror work, and understanding that your consciousness is always being mirrored back to you, for better and for worse. And so when we really begin to gaze inwardly, and we really begin to look at ourselves, this is where real true change and profound growth can come. Because stagnation on any level, whether it's stagnation in your finances, in your relationships, or your spiritual development, reflects a stagnation within yourself. And the only place we stagnate within ourselves is when we lose connection with our full awareness of what's going on within ourselves. And so fundamental or foundations begin by understanding that if you are carrying any kind of emotional pain, if you are carrying any scars in the subconscious, or any wounding that remains within your shadows, that primarily, fundamentally comes from relationships. I mean, yes, we go through life experiences where we have, we might fall over, we might have a heart attack, or we might go through these experiences on a physical level, and yes, that can create a whole load of emotional content, but that doesn't necessarily always affect how you show up in relationships. In fact, what we're really looking at, the crux of the human shadow, is actually formulated in painful relationships. And this predominantly starts in childhood. And so many of us fragment in childhood. And fragmentation is really just like the disowning, or the rejecting, or pushing away parts of yourself. And the only reason we do this in childhood is a coping mechanism. It's a way of dealing with an environment that has no resolve. So let me give a simple understanding of an environment that doesn't have any resolve. Say, for instance, that we grow up in an environment where mum and dad are very emotionally reactive. They're not accountable for how they feel. They project all of those emotions, and the projection of all of those emotions leaves the child growing up in that environment very stressed, right? Because the child has to attune to the emotions of the parents, because they're not regulating, the parents are not in a healthy state, and so the child then has to accommodate for their emotions. And this is something that happens in 99.9% of households, where there's no accountability from the parents or the primary caregivers for their own emotional state. And so children grow up in these emotional environments which are deeply painful, deeply disturbing, and deeply traumatizing. But what happens in this environment, what happens in these kind of environments, is a child begins to disown themselves. There's a disowning process that a child goes through, because their primary goal to stay safe in this relationship, to stay connected, is to accommodate for mum and dad's emotional experiences. And so as we begin to do this, and it's not just on the level of like mum and dad, there's a societal conditioning that comes into this as well. And what happens in this process is, because it becomes so painful, so disturbing, so uncomfortable for a child, we begin to disown aspects of ourselves. We begin to reject parts of ourselves. Say, for instance, if we grow up in an environment, using the same example, mum and dad being extremely volatile, we might reject the part of ourselves that wants connection, because we learn that connection in this environment is unsafe. So we might reject the part of ourselves that desires connection. We might push away the parts of ourselves that wants to be loved and acknowledged, because mum and dad have got so much going on, they're completely unaware of the emotional state of the child. We might push away the parts of ourselves that have our own authentic needs and expressions, because we're having to cater for the needs and wants and desires of mum and dad. And so fragmentation is a disowning of parts of ourselves. And what happens through this process is we push away, we reject, and we deny not only our own wants and authentic needs, but we also push away and reject who we are fundamentally. Because what we learn in these environments is that my wants, my needs are not a priority. Now, if my wants and my needs are not a priority, that means I'm not a priority. Now I'm being faced with some kind of emotional rejection. Now I'm being faced with feelings of feeling alone in the pain that I'm going through. And this begins the early processes of actually closing down emotional centers. And so as the emotional centers begin to close down, what we ultimately do in this process is we begin to reject ourselves. Now, in the process of rejecting ourselves, what we do is we turn against ourselves. We begin to internalize the externalized environment, or the external environment, which means we then start to begin to punish ourselves. We then begin to become super critical of ourselves. We become hard on ourselves. We begin to fundamentally create a relationship with ourselves that becomes deeply toxic and narcissistic, and that's because we're growing up in these environments where the emotional intelligence isn't sufficient enough to recognize the damage that's taking place. And this is the generational patterns that then play out in our lives and get passed down from generation to next. And what we do in children in these environments where there's no recognition of the damage that's playing out on an emotional level, we begin to adapt. We begin to find ways in which we can cope with that environment, because as children we have no other option but to adapt to the environment. And this is where you begin to see all of the tendencies like people pleasing and perfectionism and enmeshment trauma and all of the kind of damaging aspects that take place in human beings. And if we don't find a way in which we can enmesh and mold to the parent, and you often see in childhood as well a lot of like rebellions, this is when we begin to turn against our primary carers. We begin to enter into destructive patterns. We begin to rebel. We begin to fight against it. And what it really does, this whole shaping period in our early childhood, it begins to condition ourselves to fundamentally believe at the very core that connection is unsafe. And so through the process of closing down the emotional centers, we then can start to like hold on to resentment. We can begin to resent people. We can begin to blame other people for how they've treated us, and not recognizing that the shutting down part, the holding on is the replication of the painful experiences that you've been through. Because in the process of closing down the emotional centers, in the process of not allowing yourself to work through it and letting go of it, you then recreate the numbness or the harshness and the coldness that your parents demonstrated to you. And then we have children and we recreate that, and then more children are born into environments where they have to disassociate and they fragment and they push parts of themselves away and they lose authentic connection and they lose an authentic expression and to stay in touch with who they are. And so when you look at society, when you look at the family homes, what you're looking at is a conditioning system. We are conditioning ourselves to disregard our own unique wants, needs and desires. And that painful process comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of losing ourselves in that. And what happens is all of this pain, when we fragment, the fragmented parts don't go anywhere. They're just outside of our awareness. They're banished to our shadow. They're banished to our subconscious. But they still remain as physical, emotional experiences held within the body. And now what happens is these fragmented parts, they begin to come together, and it becomes like an emotional ball. Now that emotional ball is not active all of the time. You will notice that you're not down and heavy all of the time, but you'll start to see that in your life you get triggered, right? And this is what we're talking about when it comes to triggers, that when you get triggered, what you're really dealing with is the fragmented parts of yourself that have been rejected, disowned and denied. And so whenever you see these triggers, what rushes up to the surface in a trigger is all of the pain in the subconscious. And that then, wreaks havoc on your relationships. It gets expressed into the children. What you will notice is your unresolved emotional pain gets expressed in the most easiest of places, like on our loved ones, like on our family members, like on our children, sometimes our friendships. And so that emotional brunt gets picked up. The emotional undealt with trauma gets picked up by your loved ones. And so it becomes destructive to your relationships. And so fundamentally, this is what we are seeing in humanity, is we have these emotional blocks because we haven't been responsible for the pain we're carrying, because we're either using it to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, to blame other people, because we believe that limits us from being hurt further, not recognizing that these are trauma responses or coping mechanisms for the fact that we've already been hurt. And that is like the fundamental understanding of any teaching when you come into a space of healing, is that there's elements of you, aspects of you that are absolutely broken. There's aspects of you that are absolutely, when I say broken, heartbroken. There's a part of you that's absolutely destroyed. But have you recognized it? Have you gone into yourself? And the beautiful thing about shadow work is not on the level of mind. Shadow work is on the level of the body. It's understanding that the emotional doorway is the emotional body is the doorway into the subconscious, is the doorway into the suppressed self. So when we begin to tune in with our emotions and we begin to learn to process them in a healthy way rather than exploding and expressing, we begin to meet the subconscious, we begin to meet the shadow. And when we begin to meet the shadow, we begin to really process and address our hurts, our pains. And actually, this is where the true shadow work gold comes in, because when I connect with my pain, when I process my pain, when I process what I've been through, in the processing of what I've been through, I begin to recognize what was missing. So when I process how painful it was to go through childhood and to not have any true love and connection, I find in that true love and connection. Because I'm recognizing what was missing. And by recognizing what was missing, I'm allowing myself to feel the pain of it, but in the feeling of the pain of it, I'm also giving that to myself. I'm giving the part of myself that I pushed away the love and connection that it never received. And this is what begins to change the whole. Not only does it create awareness of your shadow and bring more of yourself online or more of yourself into the light, but it begins to create a fundamental shift on an emotional level within you. When you begin to shift, when you begin to heal, you begin to grow in more awareness, more love, more light, more compassion, more empathy, more understanding. Now you begin to rewire your whole central nervous system. You begin to come out of fight and flight. Because if you've been scarred or hurt in relationships, most people live in states of hypervigilance, and they're so used to being in that state, they're not even recognizing that they're even in that state. It's only when they do the work and start to ground the central nervous system, start to rewire and heal themselves, that they begin to see how dysfunctional they are. Like I lived 30 years of complete dysfunction, ruining my body, steroids, drugs, super unhappy in my relationship, super unhealthy as a father, very reactive, very explosive. I look back now and I'm like, wow, how did I not see that the pain that I was carrying, that I hadn't dealt with and processed, was ruining my whole life. Ruining my whole life. But what you find when you go into this is when you begin to deal and process it and awaken within, you begin to find a whole belief system that is ruining your life. Your whole belief system created around your shadow of not feeling good enough, not being worthy, not being wanted, not being loved. Like, all of those beliefs come to the surface. Now you're really beginning to see yourself. And in the process of seeing yourself, you also see how cold and closed off you've been and how much you've hurt other people as a result of not dealing with the emotional condition, the pain that you've been carrying. So not only does you begin to shift within, but as you begin to shift within, how you relate to other people begins to shift. How you show up in your relationships begins to shift. You're now no longer demanding other people to love you because you're in so much pain that you're actually loving yourself, and now you can show up in a relationship in a healthy way. Now you can actually show up in your life in a healthy way because you're no longer trying to hide the scars of the fact that you've been pushed away or abandoned or unwanted. Like, when you're no longer hiding from yourself, you won't hide from the world. When you are so confronting with what's going on within you, you will stand in all of yourself. You will find your authenticity. You will find who you are. But it begins by looking within. And if you take anything away from this video today, start to look within, because I promise you it will change your life forever. I hope this video helped. Till next time, much love.